Welcome to another episode of Healthy Thriving Family After Divorce Book Club. I'm your host, Stephanie Dobson. I'm the founder and content creator for Up a Notch Learning, Inc., and I'm pleased to have you join us today for another book club, which highlights our amazing finds of positive and constructive books relating to separation and divorce, which can help families build skills and gain tools on your quest towards a healthy, thriving family after divorce. Today, we're featuring The Parent's Guide to Birdnesting, a child-centered solution to co-parenting during separation and divorce, written by Dr. Ann Buscho. I'm pleased to have with us today Dr. Buscho herself, as well as Amrit Malhotra, a registered social worker from Ontario, Canada, who has joined me for many of our book club episodes. Dr. Buscho is a licensed clinical psychologist who specializes in family issues and issues relating to divorce, parenting planning, and co-parenting counseling. She has professional and personal experience in nesting, co-parenting, step-parenting, and single parenting issues. She hangs up her shingle in the San Francisco Bay Area of the California, USA. Welcome, Dr. Buscho and Amrit.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for coming. So let's talk today about the main theme of the book, which is birds nesting. We all got our copies of it?
We got it.
Yeah. In essence, it's an arrangement where separating or divorcing parents use the family home as the children's home, and the parents move in and out of the home based on their parenting schedule. It's usually a temporary arrangement, which parents may consider towards the start of their transition into separation as a way to kind of bridge the gap when moving from a one home family into two. You describe, Anne, in the title, it's a child-centered solution to co-parenting during separation and divorce. Anne, can you tell us a little bit more about what nesting is and how it can be so beneficial to families?
Of course, it's called nesting because, like birds swooping in and out of the nest to care for their babies, parents are on an agreed upon schedule where they go on and off duty to take care of the children. The children stay in one place, so their lives stay stable. They are minimally disrupted. They have some time to adjust to being parented by one parent at a time. They've got some respite from the tension that was going on between the parents that they may have felt or witnessed. So there are many advantages for kids. When the parents are off duty, they could be in any number of places. They could even still be in the home in a separate room, which during COVID, many people were forced to nest. They had not chosen it, but many people that I worked with rearranged rooms in their house so that they could nest within the home. It's a little more confusing for kids, but it works. Otherwise, depending on their budget, they may share an off-site apartment or rent a room in a home, in a shared rental. I've had people be very creative in their off-site where they go when they're off duty. A fold-out couch at work. One person I worked with slept at the church because there was a fold-out sofa there. So for the parents, there are huge benefits too, which is they get some time to think through whether they do want to get divorced or to reconcile. It gives them time to deal with their own emotions so that they can deal with a legal process without being so intensely affected emotionally. Gives them time to get used to being solo parents. Learning how to do the things maybe their spouse used to do when they were living together. So it's like a softened startup. John Gottman uses that term to describe parents when they're in conflict. A softened startup in a divorce is this kind of thing where it isn't an immediate break and it isn't an immediate dash to the lawyer's office.
Mm-hmm. Sounds like there would also be some significant financial benefits to it as well. That's obviously not the focus of it. The children and their stability and routine and consistency is such a benefit, as well as the parents' routine, stability, and consistency, in fact. But from a financial standpoint, instead of this one parent going out and setting up another complete residence. It may be, as you said, there can be a makeshift residence, or going to spend that time with family, or, as you said, a cot somewhere.
Airbnb. People have been very creative. And the other thing, the other financial piece is that for many people, the family home is their biggest asset, and they don't know what their financial situation is going to be yet. And so waiting until they know what their financial situation is, nesting can carry them through that. Um, I'm working now with a family where they just decided they didn't want to nest. It was too much conflict between the two of them. But the husband could only afford a very small apartment, so he can never have the children stay with him. So in essence, he's missing out on all the parenting time that he could have had if they had been able to nest.
How long, and would most people be in a nesting situation?
Well, it's such a good question, because I do view it as a temporary arrangement. And people usually, when they start, they don't know how long it's going to go. They want to see how it goes. For some people, it's a matter of months. Some people have a milestone they want to reach, like the house is sold, or the children finish high school, or some other kind of milestone. I've seen nesting end frequently when one person gets into a serious relationship and they are ready to stop the nesting then. But I interviewed a family in my book at the end of A Parent's Guide to Bird Nesting. They nested for 6.5 years. And I interviewed all 5 members. The 3 kids are all adults now. And it was really interesting to hear their experience of nesting. The thing that struck me the most was that they said their parents carried the burden of the divorce, and that the kids didn't have to. The kids stayed in their rooms, they went to their same school, they had their same friends. Their lives really didn't change that much, but the parents were in and out. So it's how long, it really depends. That's the answer to the question.
Thank you.
My ex-husband and I nested for 15 months. This is back in the early 90s. And we didn't have any timetable. But when he got into a serious relationship, he wanted to be able to live with her in the house. And that was when he chose to end the nesting. And he only gave me a month's notice, which wasn't nearly long enough, because our divorce wasn't done and I didn't know what our finances were yet. So in my book, I recommend, just out of respect, giving at least 90 days notice if one party wants to end the nesting.
There would be so many things to consider as families decide to start this kind of arrangement. And I'm thinking about it in the sense that, yes, the children's lives don't change as much, because they've got their one home and they don't have to move between homes. But as far as the parents becoming roommates of sorts and having to make sure that, roommates not there at the same time, of course, but roommates, and trying to maintain one home while they're trying to separate at the same time. I'm wondering if you can comment on some of the things that parents may want to consider as they're moving into a nesting type situation.
Yeah. Well, so parents are going in and out of the home, which the kids will have to do later. So it's a good experience for them to learn what that's like, to go in and out, packing up, unpacking, moving. What they need to consider is the agreements that they have to have in order to make the nesting successful. So they need to have some basic agreements. For example, will the sheets be changed when the parent comes on duty? Will the laundry be done? Will the sink be filled with dishes or not?
I was just thinking dishes.
Yep. Will they find milk in the refrigerator? They need to have some basic agreements about how they leave the home. And if they're sharing an offsite apartment, for example, they need to have agreements about that place as well. One of the really most important agreements, other than that, is not to bring dates to the family home. And if that needs to be explicitly discussed and agreed upon. it would be way too soon for kids to be meeting parents, new partners, if there are any. And I saw one nesting arrangement really fall apart because they didn't have such an agreement, and mom came into the house and found a used condom in the bedroom that did not go over well. So explicit agreements, I think the most important thing is written, documented agreements that they can commit to, which will help them build trust. It will help with communication. They need to have agreements about how to make those transitions in and out of the house seamless for the kids. So what kind of information are they going to share with the other parent when they go off duty? You know, the little one has had a stomach ache, the older one has homework due on Friday, that sort of thing, so that the kids feel like their parents' transitions are seamless, and they also have the security of knowing that their parents are working together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I can imagine that if there's a certain degree of conflict, that may cause the nesting arrangement to not really work. If they can't communicate about these sorts of things, I could imagine that it would fall apart pretty quickly.
So, when I talk to parents, the one thing every couple agrees on is that they want to do what's best for their kids. I mean, sometimes they can agree on nothing else, but they both love the children. They both want what's best for them. So then if they can put their children ahead of their own emotions, nesting can succeed. They have to really prioritize the kids. So we know from a lot of research that conflict is the most damaging part of divorce for children. Children can feel the conflict between their parents. They can feel it in the way the parent hugs them or the expression on their face if they've just gotten off the phone with their spouse and had some sort of argument. So the nesting really gives parents the opportunity to decrease the conflict, which is really helpful for the kids and the parents. If they can't do that, then nesting isn't going to go well. During COVID, when I worked with some pretty high conflict couples that really needed a firewall between them, even though they continued to live in the same home and had zero communication, they would just have to send each other a text message for the important stuff. If there was a medical issue or something that was time sensitive. But even they could nest successfully. Whatever it takes to end the conflict, that's the goal.
And I think part of what you're talking about, of course, you as a clinical psychologist work with families directly, and Amrit and I also work with families directly. And what we all find, I'm going to assume here is what we all find is that with a little bit of professional assistance, with a child-centered and family-centered divorce professional, you can really put together quite an effective and detailed plan, because all of us as professionals, we can usually anticipate the places where there's going to be conflict, or we can help families to identify that by exploring where there's conflict. And so often families or separating couples, I should say, aren't often able to discuss all of those details. It leads to more conflict, which is, of course, what we're trying to avoid for the long term. And so just by being able to sit down with a professional, if you're planning on nesting, to working some of these details out ahead of time before the conflict arises, and to really plan that effectively, I would presume will make the length of the nesting possibly be much longer.
And more successful, more rewarding.
More
Yes.
workable. Yeah.
And even if the nesting only lasts for a couple of months, I still see that as a success because you've given your kids that much time to begin to adjust to the changes in the family. But the reason I wrote the book is because not everybody can sit down with a professional to walk through and predict the things that could go wrong, right? I mean, if people are fortunate enough to have somebody like you or Amrit or me in their lives that can help, great, but not everybody can. The book is really a very hands-on, practical, step-by-step guide so that even people who aren't working with professionals can still do it successfully, can still put together a successful plan.
Well, and there's a whole section right in the middle of the book that's a worksheet, a parenting plan worksheet that parents can go through and fill out the questions or fill out the answers to the questions, I should say. And then all throughout the book, there's prompts on various topics. And that's, as you said, that's the purpose of the book, is to be somewhat of a self-help guide to explaining, number one, what nesting is. There's a lot of parents that don't even realize that this is a possibility, and are assuming that as soon as we separate, we must move into two homes, don't know that these are options. And that's one of the reasons I'm so thankful that and you were able to join us today, and we were able to bring light to your book, because it is such an important topic. And at Up a Notch Learning, what we're really trying to do is to bring light to all of these different ways and tools and skills that you can have and build to having a more successful co-parenting relationship going into the future. So thank you for being part of it.
Well, it's amazing to me that so few people have heard of nesting, because it has been around for a long time. When I separated from my husband in the early 90s, our therapist recommended nesting, but she didn't know how to do it. She knew nothing about it, but she knew the word, and she knew the principle of taking turns being in the home, but we didn't have a good schedule. We didn't have any written agreements. That's one reason I wrote the book, is I learned kind of the hard way, the school of hard knocks, what you need to have a successful arrangement and what mistakes you can predict and hopefully avoid.
Well, one of the things I find is that when people come to see me as a divorce professional, very often they describe that there's been a period of separation, even though they're living in the same home. And they don't describe it as using the word nesting or birds nesting. They just say, we've been separated for a year. We've been separated for 2 years. And I've been living in the master bedroom and the other person's been living in the basement. And we've been doing our thing. We don't ever talk. And we've just been existing. And now, well, we feel like it's time to move forward. And so to me, during that whole time, they've lost that opportunity to effectively, learn to communicate and learn sort of how they can actually do that successfully. Because I find that when people come to me, they've just coasted. I don't know if that's the right word to use, but that's what it seems to me. So it's great that people can have this kind of a resource to say, these are the kind of things that we should talk about ahead of time so that we can do it successfully.
And I give those clients that you're talking about some credit, because even though it wasn't structured as a nesting arrangement, they did separate so that the conflict maybe ended. Their kids were able to feel secure and parented by both of them. It might have been more rewarding. It might have been more successful if they'd had all these agreements and read my book. But they did give their kids that advantage of some time and themselves some time to kind of gather themselves and decide, what they want to do.
And have you found that there are certain situations where you wouldn't recommend nesting?
Yeah, absolutely.
Can you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. Well, first of all, both parents have to want to be actively involved in their kids' lives. And if one parent is really career focused and travels a lot for work and can't really make time, then that probably isn't going to go so well. If there is active mental illness, active addiction, untreated, those are problems that need to be addressed. There's a self-assessment questionnaire in the book that people can complete, and they'll see areas that either say that nesting isn't the best option, or they highlight areas that they could work on, that they could identify as areas to work on, maybe with some help.
Well, and we hope that, as you said, that if it can work, it's such a wonderful advantage to for so many families. If they can make it work. But as you said, there should be some warning signs, and this is an option that people may want to consider.
Yes, it's an option, and it's a healthy option. And I would like nesting to become a household term. If people are thinking about divorce, I would like in my dreams, people would always say, well, let's nest for a while and gather ourselves, get ourselves together, figure out what we're going to do, and keep the kids stable.
And as you said, Anne, earlier, it's also an opportunity for parents to decide whether the separation is something that they want to be permanent or not. Because
That's
so often as people are in that emotional state, they may say things or do things that they don't mean, or they realize later that they didn't mean. And they use the D word, the divorce word. And, a month or two later, they say, well, I actually think I'm changing my mind. And so without setting up a whole nother household, that can be a very helpful way to give people space, maintain some consistency for the children, and then figure out what might be of benefit.
So, I mean, the statistics are 13% of parents who separate or couples who separate reconcile. 13%, it's not a lot, but it's not none either. I think nesting gives parents the option of not focusing on that D word, not running out and hiring lawyers right away, but focusing on maybe some counseling, couples counseling, maybe starting to establish some date nights if they really want to try to repair the relationship. And actually, I have a chapter that talks about that if they do decide to reconcile. But I would say most eventually go on to divorce. I don't know if the statistic would be different for nesting parents. That would be a wonderful study for some grad student to take on.
Yeah, and on that vein of self-care, you've got two whole chapters in the book on self-care. One is chapter 8, coping with your feelings, and one is chapter 9, taking care of yourself. And wellness during the time of birds nesting would be of utmost importance.
Yeah, that's right. So what I coach people during their off-duty time to really take care of themselves, exercise, join a club, connect with friends. If they have a flexible work schedule, try to have less work when they're with their children and maybe work more when they're not with the kids, because that kind of reduces their guilt about only being with their children part-time. But the real reason is that divorce is only about 5% legal, right? There's a lot of paperwork, there's a lot of like decisions about money and custody and all of that, but that's really only 5% maybe of the divorce. It's mostly emotional. All those hopes and dreams that people had when they got married, and all the unraveling of all of the hurts and the betrayals and the disappointments, that's the real stuff that comes up during divorce. And when people haven't taken the time to work through that in some way, they're going to bring that right into the attorney's office and into their negotiations. And the negotiations are going to be rough, and it's going to take longer, and it's going to be more expensive. And so I think when people can take care of their own emotions, kind of calm themselves down, they will be able to think more rationally. They'll be able to make better decisions. There's a lot of information they may need to take in about the law. They'll be able to do that better. So that buying time to take care of yourself before moving into that legal process is going to make that process so much more easy and more efficient.
Well, and in one of our courses at Up a Notch Learning, it's called Divorce Wellness. And it's actually one module within the full length course called Healthy Thriving Families 101. And I added that in as part of the foundational course. So Healthy Thriving Families 101 is the foundation of how to, embark on a separation and all the kinds of initial things to think about. And I added divorce wellness in there, not as the very first lesson. And I thought I'd get some of the other things out of the way and then end with divorce wellness. And part of that is because, just as you said, and it's really important to focus on your own wellness so that you can move forward more successfully.
Yeah, especially if you're bringing a lot of grief or anger or guilt that's what people walk away, or when people separate, that's a lot of what people are carrying. If there's been a betrayal, or if there's shame about the failure of the marriage, and in some cultures that's more common than others. So dealing with all of those feelings, taking care of themselves so they feel strong and they feel healthy when they start working on the legal decisions that need to be made, dividing and sharing and whatever they're going to do, it'll just go much more easily.
And to your point, and also the well-being of the children in experiencing the adult that's taking care of themselves, and they're in a good place to be able to parent effectively and to be there and to show up, and to also assist in the story that the kids are going to be telling later about what this experience looked like for them.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. And it's modeling for the kids. This is how we deal with difficult situations. We take care of ourselves. We try to reduce the stress, right? So it's a good model for kids.
And I have to remark, I'm a lawyer by background, lawyer and mediator, and I have two mental health professionals here on the call. And so I have to say it, that Ann, you had said that about 5% is legal and 95% is the emotional side, the feeling side. And I was in another interview with another lawyer, and I recall distinctly, we were talking about that percentage as well. And as two lawyers on the call, we said, well, about 40 or 45% is the legal, and 55, 60% is the emotional. And so I just had to say in jest that, of course, the mental health professionals would say, no, it's 95%, and the lawyer part is only 5%.
Well, it's such a subjective. I mean,
It
these
is.
are made up
Totally
statistics,
is.
right?
Yeah.
It's so subjective.
Totally is.
Yeah. And
But
it's
I've
not
met very few people who are going through the divorce that have not had intense feelings, behaved in ways that nobody would have ever predicted. It's a life crisis, and it's in the stress scales, the only thing more stressful, life event that's more stressful, is the death of a child, which is it's up there of all the terrible things that can happen in life. Divorce is number 2.
Yeah, and whatever the percentage, of course I say that in jest, but whatever the percentage is, you're absolutely right. And on the legal front, when I work with families, it is really hard when the wellness side is not taken care of, or the emotional side is not taken care of. And at Up a Notch Learning, we have lots of interviews with mental health professionals who are not advocating necessarily for themselves. They're advocating for the service that is to get help to manage those emotions and to learn how to, create that wellness going forward, because that will, as you said, Anne, that will help the legal process go so much more smoothly and less reactionary.
That's right. They'll be less reactive. And also, as you're talking, I'm also thinking about when you take care of yourself, you're going to be able to communicate better with your soon-to-be ex, with your spouse, because you'll be calmer, right? If you'll be more rational, you'll be able to make requests without attacks. And so again, it has benefits on so many levels, not just in the lawyer's office, but long-term benefits in the communication between the spouses too.
Yeah, I do try to encourage, the healthy families. And one of my main concerns is, of course, the children, because they're going to be growing up in a 2-home family, and that's not their choice, but that's their reality. And so part of my professional goal is to help parents to be more healthy. And again, this is part of the mission of Up a Notch Learning, is to help the parents be more healthy so that they can help to create healthy children. Because if they're not healthy themselves, they will exude that. And you were talking, Anne, a while back about the nonverbal communication, and the kids feel it. They feel that toxicity or the stress or all of those things when parents aren't healthy. And when they know that the parents have gone to yoga and they've come back and they're nice and relaxed, the kids are relaxed too. Doesn't just have to be yoga, but that was just, of course, an example.
Yeah. The other thing that I think is important for parents who are in the middle of this life crisis. What is a life crisis for them is to think about what's the story their children are going to have about their parents split and divorce. And what's the story, 10 years from now, 15, 20 years from now, that they'll be telling their friends about what happened in their childhood and what happened when their parents separated. Because that story is starting right now, right? This isn't something that's going to happen in the future. This is something that's happening right now. So how the parents interact with the kids and how they interact with each other is helping to build a certain narrative for them. So parents can often agree on the story that they would like their kids to be telling in the future. And that can be sort of the standard for them when they think about their decisions now or the way they communicate to each other now.
We have an interview also with Nancy Smith, and she talks about the divorce narrative and creating that divorce narrative and what is that. And it's a whole interview about that. So our viewers can go check that out if they want. But that's absolutely true, is that story gets created, and sometimes it's created for you by the children in how they feel and how they are experiencing the divorce themselves. And so if we can give them the best experience possible, then the parents are doing a great job.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. So let's talk about the book a little bit more. What inspired you to write the book? What's your story about how this book came to be?
Well, so as I mentioned, we had no guidance when we nested in the early 90s. But in the interim, I thought a lot about the lessons I had learned, and in my work because all of my work is with people going through divorce, I talked to a lot of people about nesting and how they might be able to do it. And so in the Parent's Guide to Birdnesting, I have a lot of case examples, stories, real stories of people's experiences with nesting. And that all comes from my work over the last 25 years or so. And so in about 2014, I wrote a blog about it. And it's because it was of interest to me. I hadn't thought about writing a book at that point. But a couple of years later, I was approached by a publisher, Simon and Schuster, and they told me that bird nesting is what they call it, is a trending topic. There was a TV show called Splitting Up Together, and it was on ABC for a while, and the parents were nesting. They had converted the garage, bless you. They had converted the garage into the off-duty parents' site. So they asked me if I would write the book. I've never written a book before. I come from a long line of writers, but I'd never written a book before. So I thought about it, and I was intrigued by the idea. And so I put together an outline, and they liked it. And so I spent basically an entire summer when I didn't get out of my pajamas and just wrote. And I really enjoyed it. I found that I really enjoyed it. And they then edited it, and they created the cover, the title, the design, and all of that. So it was a very rewarding experience. I knew nothing about publishing before that. So it was quite a learning experience. And along the way, I got really fired up about it because I realized that this is important for people to know, and I want to get the word out. There's nothing out there other than some newspaper articles talking about all the challenges of nesting failing and that sort of thing. And there was nothing out there that talked about how it could be successful, what the advantages were, and how to help people. So I felt like it was an important contribution. So that was fun. Now I have another book that I'm writing, or that's already actually at the publisher. So.
Oh, we look forward to seeing that one.
Oh. That'll be a different one. Yeah.
What you talk about working with a publisher and for the first time, what do you have any goodies as far as the kinds of things that were not in the final published copy that you could talk to our viewers about?
Sure. So the publisher, they are focused on what's going to sell. It's a business. They want to make money. They're focused on how they're going to market the book. So they had an idea for formatting the book with, sidebars and key points at the end of every chapter. And that wasn't how I wrote it. I had the sidebars were my stories that were part of the narrative, but they pulled those out and set them aside. They chose to leave out some of those stories. The last chapter where I interviewed all 5 members of this family, which I felt was such a great opportunity, they cut about half of it out, which actually I should say they asked me to cut about half of it out because I did the cutting, and that was actually quite a benefit, not letting them do the cutting. But I feel like it in the end, it worked out just the way it should have. I think it worked out to be a good package. I think they did a good job.
Yeah,
and by
when
the
I
way,
read it,
after I finished the book, and I've talked about this family that nested for 6.5 years, I met someone whose parents nested for 12 years, and I couldn't believe it. But that goes back to your question of how long. Yeah.
Yeah,
Usually.
the word temporary is so unique in each family, and it really depends on their own circumstances.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. I will say that working with a publisher, as a writer who'd never published before, I didn't really know, like, what do they do and what do I do? And for example, and the publishing world has changed a lot since the internet, basically. And so right now, publishers are really responsible for their own publicity and marketing. I'm sorry, authors are responsible for their own publicity and marketing. And I'm not trained to do that. I'm not very good at it. But I had to get better at it, get on social media more. And, and these are expectations now in the publishing world that didn't exist before. I thought you just write a book and hand it over and they pay to, fly me to New York. That did not happen. That did not happen.
Well, on your website is great as far as explaining about the book and really picking out some of the points about the benefits of nesting and why you would want to do it. And so you're definitely on your way as far as that advertising is concerned.
Well, I think this book, it's not like a novel that you want to take to the beach and read in the summer. It's a book people will get when they need it. So I think it'll have a long shelf life. It's not one of these things that will flame and then kind of disappear. So it's very different to try to market a book in that way, because it's only going to appeal to people who are contemplating separation or divorce.
Well, speaking of reading on the beach, I have to say that on my honeymoon, I brought divorce books because I don't read as much fiction. I love to read nonfiction, and there's so many wonderful, positive and constructive books about separation and divorce. And so I think, I was reading some book and my husband just laughed. We were in Hawaii and he said, "You're reading a divorce book on the beach." He says, "I got to take a picture of this. This is our honeymoon." I said, "Well, it is, but that's what I do." And I still do that even when we're, when we're on holidays and I'm typically reading divorce books. So it might be something that people read on the beach. I guess I'm unique in that way.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's funny.
Yeah. So Anne, what's your favorite part of the book?
My favorite part of the book? That's a hard question. I'm very attached to the stories, I think, because they come from my real experience in working with people. So that to me feels more heartfelt. The rest of the book is very practical. It's lessons learned, from each of these clients, each of these experiences. I don't know that I could pick one favorite part, although I do think that interview with the family of 5 might be my favorite part, actually. Because it was wonderful to see how all 5 of them opened up, and they had never talked to each other about the divorce or their experience. The 5 of them had never compared notes. And when I interviewed all 5 of them, and now they've seen it in the book, it's the first time they are talking about it to each other. So that's kind of cool. I like that.
Mm-hmm.
Those
Mm-hmm.
stories are so important. It's so relatable for people when they see them. So it's wonderful that you've included that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And stories on so many different facets of nesting. So it can be very helpful. As you said, relatable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yep.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Ann and Amrit, for joining us today on another episode of Healthy Thriving Family After Divorce. And thank you to our viewers for tuning in. So please join us for other resources in our e-learning community. We've got our interview series and our blogs and our downloadable ebooks. We've got our courses for purchase. So please feel free to browse around, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, thank you for coming.